That's an outright lie. They're not doing that. Never be afraid to surround yourself with people cleverer and more able than you. It's not illegal, it's all politics. Care homes will close. By not excluding social care, they've shot themselves not in one foot, but in both feet. There's nobody with any business experience. The benefit to the NHS would be huge. Care home business is about people and property. They're not in listening mode. We need more funds to the front line, not more civil servants. That's the last thing we need.
Voices of Care, the Healthcare Podcast.
Dr. Robert Kilgour, welcome to Voices of Care. It's been a long time since we wanted you to come on board because we're really keen to talk about Scotland. So thank you for making the trip to see us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
I wanted to kick off with the scene, your view of social care in Scotland. The budget a couple of months ago was lauded by the finance minister as a record investment. You've gone on record as saying the sector's sleepwalking over a cliff edge. You can't both be right.
No, well, I think, the sad thing is the demographics for the sector are really, really good. But obviously the perennial problems, staffing and funding. And that is the same in Scotland. Two key issues and problems, the same as in England. But one of the things that certainly in England, when the government ministers say, oh, we're putting an extra 880 million into social care, they're not. That's an outright lie. They're not doing that. What they're doing is giving local authorities 880 million for social care, and which includes children's services is included. That's quite a large chunk of that 880 million. And also it's not ring-fenced. So as happened during the pandemic, money given, and I had these arguments with Rishi when he was Chancellor, about, but I've given 3 billion to social care. You haven't, Rishi, because you give money, governments give money to local authorities, and they have loads of leaky buckets all over the place. By the time it does get to the front line of social care, it's a vastly smaller number. And anyway, even if all that, every single penny of that 880 million got to the front line, it's still woefully short of what's needed. And they know that.
And that's the surprising thing, because again, going back to the Scottish budget, 21 billion, I think, was the number that was lauded around health and social care. Scottish Care's chief executive, who I'm sure you know, Donald McCaskill, has talked about the fact that it's a betrayal of the sector.
Yes, well, both the budget in October, UK budget, and the Scottish budget. Care homes will close and vulnerable elderly will die as a direct result of these budgets.
Basically, the addition of the employer's national insurance.
Yes, well, in England,
over here,
there's a triple whammy. There's the national living wage issue, which is less of an issue in Scotland, and which I'll explain in a second. And then you've got the double whammy on employers' national insurance, where the increase of 8.7% of 13.8 to 15, we keep talking about it being 1.2%, and I hate that. It's 8.7%. But the biggest kicker is the lowering of the threshold from 9,100 to 5,000. And the three sectors hit the hardest by that are hospitality, retail, and care. And it really in England, there's, I think it's 12.5%, 13% added costs from the budget. And yet I've seen some local authorities in England, not that I have care homes currently in England, but I've seen some give no increase this year. And it varies between 1, 2, 3, some 3.5. I think the highest I've seen is one in Wolverhampton that was 6.6%.
So way less than the burden of additional cost. Now, you hinted earlier, Robert, about it's very similar, the demographics and the market in Scotland, but there are some distinctive features of the Scottish social care market. I wonder if you just briefly
there are less private funders, for example, in Scotland than in England. That's a fact, particularly obviously compared to, say, the south of England. But Renaissance Care, for example, we operate currently 19 homes across 11 different local authority areas out of the 32 in Scotland. And we have 900 registered beds and 1,500 part and full-time staff. Now, we have 70%. We are a private business, but we have 70% of our residents are local authority residents and 30% are private funders. So we are a private business, a private company, but we are in the main providing a public service. Incidentally, at about half the cost per resident per week that Scottish local authorities spend of taxpayers' money on running their own care homes.
Now, that's an interesting point, because the commissioning issue is one that's big here in England. But looking at Scotland, again, someone not renowned for mincing their words, I think you've talked about rank hypocrisy in terms of the commissioning in Scotland with the fee rates.
Well, it is. And also there are a higher percentage of care homes in Scotland are local authority run. It's about 15-16% of care homes in Scotland are either local authority or NHS. It's mainly NHS Highland, because Highland local authority don't run the care homes, NHS Highland do. And 85%
is independent sector.
Are the independent and voluntary sector combined. Now that's much higher than and actually on the national insurance, employers' national insurance, those same local authorities that are running at, in fact, about £2,000 per week per resident, when they're paying us £960 a week. So double the cost, more than double the cost per resident per week. They're going to get fully refunded for the extra employers' national insurance effects. Both the 8.7% increase from 13.8 to 15 and also the effect of the lowering of the threshold. They're going to get extra money to pay for that, but we're not, even though we're providing in the main a public service.
And you're getting paid half the rate. How is that not a scandal that's causing...
Well, I've had a KC look at it recently. At not inconsiderable cost to me personally. I just decided I needed to do this. But is there a case for a judicial review? Because particularly the Scottish Government are funding extra money to already profligate, if you like, local authority care homes. They're giving them extra money for the employers' national insurance increases, and yet they're not doing that for us, who are providing a much better value for money for taxpayer service. And the KC's opinion has come back saying it's very unfair, very wasteful of taxpayers' money. That's for the Auditor General to look at.
Sure.
But it's not illegal and not worthy of judicial review, which we're still trying to tweak a little bit and going back on a couple of points, but it's not looking healthy in that regard. But I am planning on further outing this disparity, this difference between what the Scottish Government are funding local authorities and what those same local authorities funded by the Scottish Government are funding us in the independent...
For the same service?
For the same service. And it's something that in England there's a smaller percentage of care homes that are local authority owned and run, but in Scotland it's bigger.
Yeah.
And so, we're competing with, and who is commissioning beds in our care homes locally? It's the same local authorities. So they're obviously going to fill their own care homes first, which is another
imbalance.
So there's quite, and then there's the perennial. I mean, I know it's a bigger number in Scotland. In England, but in percentage terms, I think it's a bigger percentage in Scotland, where the bed blocking in NHS hospitals in Scotland. It's about 2,100
Record numbers.
in Scotland, which on a percentage basis is probably higher, I think, than in England. And that's 4.5 to 5 times more expensive per person per day, being bed blocking somebody in hospital, as opposed to them being at home with a home care package or in a care home. Now, it's a double tragedy, because not only for you and I as taxpayers is it 4.5, 5 times more expensive for these 2,100 people that are clinically, unlike in Germany and Japan, where by law, if somebody clinically no longer needs to be in hospital, a place has to be found for them in the community or in a care home. That's not the case in the UK. And you get this territorial budget fighting between the local authorities saying, we don't have the money, we'll leave this person in hospital, and NHS desperately trying to get them out. And what that means, not only is it bad for you and I as taxpayers, arguably more important, it's bad for the person in hospital.
Receiving the care.
Because receiving the care, but they're no longer receiving the care that is best for them.
Yeah.
Because what's best for them is to be out in the community, either with a home care package at home or in a care home. And then what happens is that they deteriorate while they're in hospital waiting to be assessed and to be found a placement. And invariably, they deteriorate so much in a matter of weeks or a few months that they're never going to come out of hospital, and they die in hospital.
And that's an immense tragedy. You've also talked about the effects, just to go back to the social care financial impact. I think Public Health Scotland produced a report in 2023 highlighting the fact that 1 in 5 care homes in Scotland had closed in the previous decade. You've used the word a tsunami of care home closures. I guess that's your prediction still?
Well, my prediction, if we see, as with defence, overtaking social care as government priority number 1, I see little or no chance of Rachel Reeves softening, not backtracking or excluding social care from the employer's national insurance changes, but even some kind of delay of part of it by 12 months would smooth and reduce the number of care homes that are going to close. But my worry is certainly in Scotland, second half of this year and the first half of next year, I think there's going to be a lot of care homes that are going to close. In fact, some of my friends that run small care home groups have been saying to me that if there's no change, even softening a little of the employer's national insurance changes, and we get what we suspect will be a 5 to 6%, but nothing more, increase in, but that's to include national living wage increases too. So nothing really for employers' national insurance increases. The 1 or 2 friends of mine with small groups have said they're going to have to go cap in hand to their bank because they will be likely to breach banking covenants because of,
which puts them at significant risk,
because of the effect
of the debt ratio
of the employers' national insurance twin increases and the small or fee increase, and because of the higher percentage, as we talked about at the beginning, of local authority residents in Scotland generally to private funded residents, and that has a bigger effect. And I don't think there's any business. It's a political point, I suppose, but it's all politics. But actually, it should be about people, not politics. But sadly, it is. But when you look at the current Labour government front bench, there's nobody with any business experience, unless you call somebody who's business secretary that's a trainee solicitor, and you know that you
a long time ago in my memory.
a long time ago. But you know the difference between a fully qualified solicitor and a trainee solicitor, but the person in charge of the business department in cabinet doesn't. And there's nobody on the Labour front bench that has any business experience whatsoever. They have no idea of what we deal with day in, day out, and which is very disappointing, very sad. And they also have no understanding of, Rachel Reeves has said, we want and need these changes to businesses, employers, national insurance, to raise the 24 billion to reduce NHS waiting lists. Well, by not excluding social care, they've shot themselves not in one foot, but in both feet, because what's going to happen is care homes are going to close. And I have no concept of what that means when a care home closes.
The burden on the NHS will then
what happens is there's more bed blocking, there's more cancelled operations, and there's larger NHS waiting lists. So they've shot themselves in both feet. And one of the things which, when you look at the care home beds that are closing year on year, and you look at the number of care home beds that are opening, new care home beds that are opening, there are more closing than opening, but it's not a massive gap. And you think, well, yeah, it's an issue, but it's not. But you need to drill down more into that, because the vast majority of the beds that are closing are local authority funded residents, and the vast majority of the beds that are being built are private funders. And when you look into that, and it's the local authority ones that then lead to more bed blocking, more cancelled operations, and longer NHS waiting lists.
So it's a hell of a time bomb. You mentioned the Labour government, and they have gone on record, of course, with the commitment to potentially at some point create a national care service. And I want to talk about that because Scotland Independent Review of Adult Social Care, Derek Feely, former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, said the creation of the National Care Service was the most ambitious reform since devolution.
No,
I think you called it a grand marketing exercise.
Well, the National Care Service is an interesting one. Actually, you mentioned the Feely report, which I engaged with, and I thought there were a lot of good things. There are a lot of good things in there. But the National Care Service I welcomed initially, and said if this is to be a genuine attempt to get more funds to the front line, and improve care at the front line, then I'm all for it and all for engaging with it. But if it's a grand marketing exercise for having a nice line in the next SNP election manifesto, then I'm not for it. And you got to the point where Unison, GMB, Scottish Care, COSLA were all in total. I mean, that's quite a unique achievement by the Scottish government to get all these bodies in complete agreement that it was badly thought out, lacking in detail, and was really all about central control away from local authorities. And they have spent £30 million on this without one single hour of extra care being delivered.
And of course, Marie Todd was very excited about it back at the Glasgow Science Centre in October 24. And of course, it's now been scrapped.
Well, I think she's on maternity leave at the moment, I think. Yes, it's been scrapped. But I really despair at the attempts to set up a national care service when they didn't engage with the stakeholders. They failed to engage in a meaningful and serious way with the stakeholders. When stakeholders were asking for details and whatever, they say, oh, look, trust us, we'll get the detail, we'll deal with that later in the detail. These are the people that can't build two ferries. You're not going to trust them to work out the details later.
And I guess they're quickly pausing there on that debacle, given the fact that it was promoted so significantly. Some key lessons, I guess, for England and Streeting's ambitions for a national care service. Engage with the stakeholders and provide detail.
And what we need is more funds to the front line, which needs it now, not in a few years' time. We need more funds to the front line, not more civil servants. That's the last thing we need. And that was a problem in Scotland. And we have finally got to a point where it's completely kind of neutered, and it is just really a kind of covering so that they can say that they are intending at some point to introduce it, but they're not sure what or when, and they're going back to the drawing board saying we will meaningfully engage with all stakeholders. But meanwhile, they've spent £30 million on this, with not one single hour of care being delivered.
I think a salutary lesson for the Labour government here with its ambitions. Now, all of this landscape overview with challenges and failing to deliver promises, particularly around funding, etc., I think caused you to say enough's enough and take some action. And I'm thinking of your setting up of the Social Care Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And there's been some exciting moves quite recently about it.
I was an occasional advisor in Number 10 to Rishi Sunak and his team on social care, and obviously saw that an election back end of 23, so an election was coming in 24, and I was looking beyond the election and likely Labour victory. So I wanted to have a platform and something cross-party to sort of encourage and support meaningful reform of social care cross-party. And so that's why I set up the Social Care Foundation. But I didn't, when I was working and advising and helping the officials in Number 10 on looking at and holding and co-chairing roundtables in Number 10 on bringing people like Martin Green and Jane House and others into, James Tugendhat and others, into Number 10 to mainly talk about, right, an election's coming, there's not going to be major reform of social care before the election, but is there some low-hanging fruit that could be done between now and the election? So So I had it on the back burner a bit initially, and then, the elections had, and I stepped it up once the election happened,
taking place,
and got it geared up more and was ready. We published one paper and was ready to move forward. But then we had the budget, and that was a game changer really for it, because I decided that I needed, for my own mental health, to take my usual sort of Mr. Angry sort of mode and direction and speak out, as I did during COVID, for more support for the care sector. I really wanted it to grow and do what I originally envisaged it doing, but I felt I wasn't the right person to do that.
So you appointed Damien Green as chair?
And I caught up with Damien post him sadly losing his seat in the July election, and pitched it to him, and he has grabbed it with both hands, and I love working with him. But a lot of people forget he's an ex-journalist.
Financial
I suppose
journalist.
once a journalist, always a journalist. But he really can, apart from the fact he has a long and proven track record, as you've discussed in your podcast with him, when he chaired the all-party parliamentary group on it. He really knows his onions from that point of view, and having been Deputy Prime Minister and in the Cabinet for a number of years. So really, I was delighted when he accepted the invitation to chair that, and haven't publicised it yet, but some of the people that are going to be on it. On the advisory council of about 11 or 12, we'll be announcing that soon in the next few weeks, and we're really excited about. In fact, we've got our first advisory council online get together end of March. End of March. Yes, it is end of March.
So lots to hear from the Social Care Foundation.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon one aspect of that because you've been on record as saying, and unfortunately, history is strewn with examples of politicians trying to solve social care funding. Dementia tax, death tax comes to mind in both Conservatives and Labour. You've called for politicians to take the brave pill. I know you're a rugby union fan, and you'll know the name of Jim Telfer, the great Scottish coach.
Yes,
and
I met him once actually.
Well, he was on record when he was asked about rugby players. He said, great ones. He said there were honest ones and then the rest, which in his own inimitable way. And I guess your call for the brave pill,
or the yes minister or yes prime minister, sort of Sir Humphrey phrase where, that's a courageous decision, minister. And I know Damien feels this way too, that it's time for a courageous decision. I mean, the social care is bigger than the NHS, and we had pre-COVID social care, it was always NHS first, social care second. And during COVID, not initially, but during it became a bit better of a balance. But post-COVID, it's gone back to NHS first, social care second. And you cannot fix the problems in the NHS without fixing social care. I mean, I've been in the sector since I opened my first care home when
1989.
I founded Four Seasons, and I had a full head of hair then, and now this is what...
I had a lot more hair then as well.
Well, this is what, although I tell my four children it was them, it was their fault, it's their fault that I've lost my hair. But I've never been prouder than I was during COVID of the amazing work that care staff did at the front line. They were truly amazing. And I did my tiny contribution bit of lobbying behind the scenes and publicly and writing about the need for more support and more funding for social care. But it is very sad. And in a way, it's not rocket science. If 10% even of this 20 odd million that's being put into the NHS was put extra into social care, the benefit to the NHS would be huge.
It would be a multiplier effect.
Oh, completely. And also people forget about that social care is a contributor to the economy.
And on a big scale.
I mean, I know you and Damien talked about that. I think it's about 5 billion in Scotland and 60 billion.
68 billion in gross value. In gross value.
Gross value. And it's something that, but also the complete nonsense of delayed discharges and this budgetary thing. We do need more integration. I know Andy Burnham in Manchester has done a reasonable amount of that. If you haven't had him on, you should.
I would be delighted to
particularly talk about
Andy, if
that.
You're listening, it's a recommendation.
And he knows his onions as well, because
former minister,
former Secretary of State for Health, although it was called Health at the time, but for Health and Social Care. But and that's probably the biggest integration experiment, is the one, and it's had its ups and downs, whatever. But that is what is needed.
So we're talking about the need for honesty, etc. So these are the big questions. I hope people will be listening. I wanted to spend the final part of the podcast, if I may, Robert, to look a little bit closely at your own journey as an entrepreneur, and particularly with your first love of business, as you've called it, which is the care sector. 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. And
I'd forgotten about that.
And Robert Kilgour set up Four Seasons, one of the great...
It happened by... it's soon to be no more.
Yes.
All good things come to an end. But it was by accident. I'd had a hotel in Edinburgh for 5 years, but found the busier the hotel got, with the bar, restaurant, and bedrooms, the busier it got, the more I had to be there. And I had a young family, and I wanted to spend more time with the family. So, and this is pre-cash cards and whatever. It was all cash.
Sure.
So the more cash it was about, the more staff, the busier you got.
Absolutely.
So I sold the hotel, was very pleased with that. And I was looking for something next to do that was less involving me. I like 7 days a week involvement, but less involving me at the front line. And so I bought it was a closed hotel in Kirkcaldy, my hometown, and was going to convert it to 31 flats. And there was a grant at the time, we're talking about 1987, of 6,500 per flat. And that was going to be my developer's profit. But between buying that property to do the flat development and submitting the flat plan to the Fife Council Planning Department, they changed the rules on grants, which meant any development over 6 flats got 0.
Right. Okay.
So
Change your plans.
Change of plans, and I had put all the money that I'd made from 5 years of the hotel into buying this building and doing the plans for the flats. And so I was scrambling around to find something to do with this building. And a friend of a friend of a friend told me about care homes I had never heard of.
Wow.
And so I went and visited a few in Edinburgh, and one of the directors of one of the companies I went to said, "Oh, I'm a QS at an architectural firm. I'll introduce you to them and I'll work with you and help you turn this building."
And the legend was born.
And that became, by accident, the first care home. And my intention was to develop it. And I got 100% finance from British Linen Bank, part of Bank of Scotland, to do the development funding. And interest rates doubled in that construction period. I wasn't able to fix rates till the home was registered, but obviously they had doubled in that period. And I moved into the care home literally to try and fill it up, because I needed to fill it up and then sell it. And I was in charge, believe it or not, of admissions until I was sacked, if you like, because I admitted, I can even remember his name, I admitted a Mr. Plunkett, and he barricaded himself in his room, broke up his furniture and set fire to his furniture. So I was sacked by the care home matron and deputy matron from any more admissions. But we got it filled. And once we got it filled, and I said, right, I'll sell it now. And then I thought, actually, it's doing quite well. Why don't I leverage that to do another one, and then another one, and then another one?
And then it became one of the very largest, of course, care home groups, legendary business.
Well, when I left, in fact, I had breakfast this morning. I bumped into John Moulton of Alchemy, who I did the deal with.
Of course.
And we were catching up. And this morning I had a working breakfast for the Jobs Foundation that I'm involved in. And what happened was that we went from the one that opened in June 1989 in Kirkcaldy, and we ended up, when I left in 2000, with 101 UK-wide and over 7,000 staff. And I was exhausted, and I signed a 3-year non-compete when I left, etc. But I said I'd sign a 30-year non-compete because I don't want to go anywhere near a care home ever again.
And then...
But I missed it. I missed it because the care home business is about people and property. And I discovered in those few years of doing other business ventures, some of which I'm still involved in, that I really missed it. And so I set up Renaissance Care
with two care homes, as I remember.
Yeah,
and you celebrated 20 years last year.
Last year, so I was in 2004, and we're sitting at the moment at 19 care homes, and we're looking at, in fact, I'm close to tying up a 20th one for June. But equally, we're also, as a lot of care home groups are having to do, is we're looking at potentially closing a service, potentially very soon, because of the budget impact. If there are no budget changes, which I think is most likely there won't be, And if we don't get a decent fee increase, which I think is most likely, then we will probably, very similar to a lot of care home operators, we're going to have no option but to look at that as part of. We're already looking at things like CapEx and energy saving investments that I'd got in place, 3-year programs of stretching them out to over 6 years.
To manage the cash flow.
To manage the cash flow. There's lots of different ways. There's no silver bullet of how to deal with, because the extra cost to Renaissance Care is £900,000
from the employers and national insurance.
Purely from the employers. The two changes to employers, the 13.8 to 15%, and the lowering of the threshold is going to cost, unbudgeted and unexpected, is going to cost Renaissance Care £900,000.
And that's
not a one-off. From next month, from April, every year. And the threat to the flood or tsunami of care home closures and the effect of that on the NHS. And it staggers me that and funnily enough, I think the Scottish Government, Kate Forbes, for example, Deputy First Minister, she does understand social care and care home and the effect of these pressures on care homes. But the UK government doesn't seem to get it at all. I have, through back channels, been communicating with Stephen Kinnock and Wes Streeting, but it's a complete silence as far as listening. They're not in listening mode. Now, whether they are completely sort of snaffled by the Treasury, which I suspect is the case, but it's so shooting yourself in both feet by doing this. It's very disappointing.
No, it is, and I think aspiring people who want to enter this sector will be looking very closely.
No, I don't want to put people.
No.
I mean,
you're scheduled to double the size of Renaissance Care. Strategy is
the first thing we've got to do is make sure that we are in a strong as possible position, despite all these attacks from the current government on employers' national insurance side. And we're close to, we feel we've got that handled, that we're going to survive and be okay and make enough money. And the key thing is to make enough money because I own over 90%, well, I own about 90%, I think the senior management team have 10%. And the key thing is to make enough money every year to pay your corporation tax, to then what's left to reinvest in your facilities. Because if you're not reinvesting and going on this upward spiral, if you're not moving forward, well, actually, if you're not moving forward, you're going back and you're going down.
Now, on that point, just penultimate point before my final question is, you've been on record as saying, now in the past, you're well aware, obviously Four Seasons, Southern Cross, there have been massive care home groups, some of which have done very well and others that haven't. You've gone on record as saying that the specialist regional approach that Renaissance Care epitomizes is probably the best way.
Yeah, the days of the Southern, remember Southern Cross had, because actually I mentioned John Moulton. John Moulton and I, funnily enough, looked at one point at buying Southern Cross when it had 700.
Things went wrong.
Well, it had 754 care homes.
Yeah.
14 of which were owned, 740 of which were leased.
Sale and lease back, yeah.
And it had a market cap on the stock market of just under £5 million. But those days are gone. I think the days, you need certain economies of scale, because the care home business was pre-COVID, looking at the care home business pre-COVID to post-COVID, it's a lower margin business post-COVID, with things like the extra clinical governance required, quite rightly, in post-COVID, etc. And actually, I would go to the next stage and say, pre the budget October, albeit the budget measures are coming into place in April 25 next month. But it's going to be an even lower margin business post October's budget measures coming into place in
April.
In April, and so you need to be you need to have a real handle on the finance. I mean, there were some lessons learned that I had, if you like, from Four Seasons, that we had too many outliers when we were expanding. We had too many homes all over the place. So at Renaissance Care, I've tried to grow it and continue to grow it in clusters that you can support both in staffing. In Aberdeen, we've got 6 homes, so we've got 6 maintenance people, 1 in each home, which means you've got a maintenance team of 6 that you can call on just like that.
Yeah.
So having, but sometimes if you want to be in an area, a cluster starts with 1 and then you do bolt-ons. So clusters, not having a senior management team in place before you expand was a mistake.
Right.
We expanded at Four Seasons and then, we need area
the
managers.
talent to lead it.
You need the talent. So I've tried to put that in place
Up front,
ahead.
right.
And equally, finance-wise, we accountants who listen to this will be shocked, but at Four Seasons, our management accounts were usually published internally 6 to 7 weeks
After the month end.
Okay.
Okay.
But it was a different world then. Margins were different, but 6 to 7 weeks.
Right. Not great visibility.
Not great visibility, even internally, let alone to your
Externally,
funders, bankers, and stakeholders. So I have used technology and embraced technology. And health and social care traditionally has not been good at embracing technology. But during COVID, we went from down here to up here. And I was determined coming out of COVID that we didn't drop back, that we did use that heightened use of technology to drive forward. And we've got Nourish across all our care homes, and we've got business modeling across the business.
Which makes a huge difference. In
good
terms
for
of
budgeting. It's also good for plugging in potential acquisitions. But the other key change post-COVID is the staffing.
the flexible staffing I was going to mention.
Well, yeah, because I felt coming out of COVID around the sort of April 22, I felt that the boot was going to be on the other foot in the new world post-COVID. People's work-life balances were completely changed in COVID. I know that with my 4 children, that completely changed their attitude to work-life balance. So we introduced flexible working, we introduced compressed working, so the managers, to help them not get burnt out, is that they can do their full week in 4 days, for example.
Yep.
And on the flexible, we'll say to you, okay, you're a single parent. What hours suit you? And because we're a relatively small company, I mean, bigger companies like HC1, Barchester, Care UK, I don't think probably could do this. But it's one of there are disadvantages of being one of the smaller corporates, but there are also advantages where we say, what hours suit you for school runs, for this kind of thing?
So very tailored, personalised.
Exactly. Yeah. And we did the work and introduced that. And one of the benefits...
You faced some objection to it, though, didn't you?
Well, the senior management team were not mad keen on it, but now they think it was their idea. So part of my job is to have the vision and the strategy, and 50% of that is to develop that, and the other 50% is to sell it to the senior management team so that they take ownership of it, because they have to deliver it at the front line. But it does benefit the bottom line, because our agency usage over the last 12 months has sort of wavered between 1% and 1.5%. And that's
very good industry average.
But that's because of things like that. We also have things like free sanitary ware products for all employees, 80% of which are female. Yeah. And actually, we also have about 2/3 of our senior management team are female, and our board is 50-50 male, female.
I mean, it's a tremendous change. 20 years, great stuff to look ahead.
But actually, yeah, if you ask what's the biggest change I've noticed since I opened my first care home in June 1989, I would say dependency of residents.
And complexity of care, I guess.
I mean, younger listeners to this podcast will think I'm joking, but I'm not. But several of the residents that moved into my first care home in 1989 brought their own cars with them and kept their cars in the airport. That's true on my children's life. That's
Wow.
absolutely true. And but obviously we are providing. I feel, and I have concerns about it too, that we're providing, in the main, end of life care, and that is a concern. That do we have enough palliative? So we are doing a number of different programs with Macmillan and with Marie Curie in that regard too.
What a changed world, right, bringing their own cars. Okay, but one final question, if I may, Robert. We've got Holyrood elections next year. We've got a very tumultuous period ahead of us. It's more on your, as a business person, I don't hate to remind you that I think you started your entrepreneurial career at Ingliston Sunday Market selling jeans and T-shirts from what I understand.
No, I did.
And,
While I was still at university.
still at university. So with all the political uncertainty, elections in Scotland next year, one or two key things that you'd ask politicians to implement, in addition to what you said, as an entrepreneur, because you've learned a lot.
I have, in fact, I had a meeting yesterday in Parliament with a Scottish MP, a Lib Dem, and I'm seeing this afternoon, among others, I'm separately seeing an SNP MP, Scottish MP, and next week I'm meeting a number of cross-party MSPs. I will
shuttling diplomacy.
I'm any parliamentarian, whether in the House of Lords, House of Commons, whatever party, or in Holyrood, that is interested in sitting down over a cup of tea or whatever and learning a bit more about what happens at the coalface at social care and what are our burning issues and concerns at the moment. There's no guarantee that this will happen, but it's with a wish and a desire that it might lead to better political. I mean, you're smiling because, I may be being, despite my advanced years, being naive.
It's great.
Being naive, but I it's just something that I have a passion for, that you hope that if they are better informed, they'll make better decisions. And that is my sort of fervent sort of hope. I mean, there's lots of things, both low-hanging fruit and bigger issues that could be, I don't see why it needs to take till 2028. But then I know Damien spoke to you about that too, and he's firmly off that view as well. But I just, as I said a few minutes ago, I came into the care home sector by accident to get me out of a hole that I'd got myself in, if you like. It's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. I still, as I hope you'll have gathered from our conversation, that I still have a bounce out of bed every morning with an energy and an enthusiasm. Mainly, I have to say, because, and it's a good point to end, I suppose, on, is that I'm not involved in the day-to-day. One of what my father was an entrepreneur, and one of his sayings to me, which I've always followed and still to this day follow, is, Robert, as an entrepreneur, never be afraid to surround yourself with people cleverer and more able than you. And I've done that all my career and continue to do that. And actually, I love working with really bright people. And it really keeps me on my toes and keeps my grey cells going. And I look forward, as you said, we've got plans to double in size. Tough sector, and a challenging and tough sector as it is, that can also mean if you've got the right platform in the technology senior management team, you can actually take advantage of the challenging situation that care is in and is going to be in over the next few years to grow our business. And we're excited about only in Scotland. We're not coming across the border. We're sticking in Scotland.
Well, on that hopeful and sagacious note, Robert Kilgour, thank you very much for your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. If you've enjoyed this episode of Voices of Care, please like, follow, or subscribe wherever you receive your podcasts. And if you want to find out more about how we're turning the dial on the debate around health and social care, please visit newcrosshealthcare.com/Voices of Care. In the meantime, I'm Suhail Mirza. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.
Voices of Care, the healthcare podcast.